here, so we need someone to handle.
You want me to do that?
That would be fine, Ms. Cripps.
Chairperson Shepard,
Here.
Barton Jackson, Casey Kelly. Here. Darrell Lewandowski.
Here.
T.J. McLaughlin. Here. Amarillo absent, Sandra Petrovsky. Here.
All right. We have a quorum. Is there a motion to approve the agenda? Is someone here at the table?
I approve the agenda as submitted.
Second?
I'll make the second to approve.
Seconded by Ms. Petrovsky. Okay, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carries. Now time for public comment. Ms. Cook.
Yes, I already asked Donna, but I would like to ask the board why February 4th minutes are not available to the public yet. The law says they have to be up and ready in 8 days. And often we're not ready that timely, but it's been 20 days, and I thought they would be out where the public could peruse them, so we could help to make sure that what you passed was what we said.
Would you care to restate that as a comment rather than ask a question?
Okay, the minutes are not out yet.
Okay.
But no, I would like to have it as a question, thank you.
Other public comment? Fine. We're done with public comment. We'll move on in the agenda. Correspondence. We had a Michigan planner for the month of February show up. And then I had a brochure come in for some transportation planning conference, which is certainly available to people here, although I don't think transportation planning is the biggest problem here in Salem Township. I think there's some other things that could use more attention. Yes, the planning and zoning news is what I really meant. I misstated that. Okay. Any other correspondence that we have, Ms. Brooks?
No.
Okay. Fine. We move on. That concludes item 5. Item 6 is public hearings, which we have none. Item 7 is new business items, none. And now we're at item 8, which is review of the draft zoning. No, it's not. It's the conditional use. Item 12004, as relates to St. Mary's Coptic Orthodox Church, where the Planning Commission needs to consider whether to approve with conditions, or deny the conditional use. And let's see if I can put things in perspective here. We had a presentation in our meeting in December where we learned a lot about the church. There were some questions. We made a motion to postpone until January the discussion of that business item after we had exhausted ourselves for the evening. That was since postponed to this evening's meeting. And in the meantime, there's been a lot of activity. There's revised site plans from the petitioners. There have been several meetings with the township professionals, and we have new reports from Mr. Pennington and from Stantec Engineering. Then they summarize where we stand with regard to the plans and the plans being acceptable both from a conditional use and from a site plan review perspective. And so what we need to do now is we need to perhaps refresh ourselves with the concerns related to conditional use approval, and then get into the, getting caught up to date on the activities that have been going between the petitioner and the professionals, and see if we can reach a conclusion on this conditional use petition. So, given that we're there, why don't I just start by, I'll highlight a few things from the conditional use standard, or the zoning ordinance as it pertains to conditional uses, if that's not gonna be redundant with what you intend to do. Okay. And what I'll do here is the conditional use standards that we have in section 63.07, I'll start with 6306. The Planning Commission needs to review the application for conditional use permit in reference to the standards and findings contained herein, meaning the Township zoning ordinance, and in relation to any information received or provided at the public hearing, which we had in December. And then the Planning Commission will either approve with conditions, or deny a conditional use permit application, and then we need to document that, and that'll be made part of the record. So, the standards, and there's a number of them, and I'll paraphrase them. One of the standards is taking into consideration the size, location, and character of the proposed land use within the context of surrounding land uses and land use planning for an area. And the point being that the use shall not be incompatible nor inharmonious as determined by the application of generally accepted planning standards with either the surrounding uses or with the orderly development of the surrounding neighborhood and or vicinity and or future uses that are reasonably anticipated, okay? It'll also be of a nature that will make vehicle and pedestrian traffic no more hazardous than is normal for the district that's involved. There's another provision where it shall not unreasonably impact upon the surrounding property in terms of noise, dust, fumes, smoke, air, water, odor, light, and or vibration, and shall not unreasonably impact a person perceiving the operation in terms of aesthetics. The proposed use will be such that the location and height of buildings or structures and nature and height of the walls, fences, and landscaping will not interfere with or discourage the appropriate development and use of adjacent land and buildings or unreasonably affect their value. The proposed use shall relate harmoniously with the physical and economic aspects of adjacent land uses. The proposed use is to be designed, located, planned, and operated such that public health, safety, and welfare will be protected. And the use shall not cause substantial injury to the value of other property in the neighborhood, which is located, and will not be detrimental to existing and or other permitted land uses in the zoning district. And this is the agricultural residential zoning district. And I believe those permitted land uses incorporates all of the uses envisioned in the as acceptable conditional uses for agricultural residential. And there's a couple other points, right? And that is, shouldn't create pollution, and it should be not unreasonably burden the capacity of public services or facilities, and it should have adequate service by public services and facilities. And that's basically it. That's the list of what we're allowed to consider as we review this application. And if I missed anything when we get to the reports from the experts, I'm sure they'll help us catch the error. But the point being, I wanted everyone here, the rest of the commissioners, as well as people sitting in the audience, to understand that's what our zoning ordinance says needs to be given consideration. It's not other things. This is the list, and we have to follow our zoning ordinance. Okay. After all that, I would like to have the experts give us just a simple summary of what we've found most recently in our work with the applicants and the existing application as it is. So, Mr. Pennington, if you would.
Thank you. I will briefly make reference to my report. That is dated February 18th. Since the last Planning Commission meeting, you had a public hearing. There was lots of discussion by the residents. There was lots of discussion and interaction by the Planning Commission. And those are the things that were paramount that came out of evaluating the proposal. Based upon that, the applicant did submit another site plan that I reviewed and had some difficulty with certain things shown on it, and I requested, some of the things be addressed. As a result of that, a meeting was called with the applicant, all the representatives. We had Township staff and our representatives here. We went over the site plan, what was needed regarding specific aspects of the zoning ordinance, the legal things, the procedural things, etc. And we went over what was discussed by the Planning Commission, what was discussed by the public, and wanted to see those addressed on the site plan. So we all went away and as to what was going to be put on the site plan for your consideration on the dated one that you have before you. I'd like to go over just a couple things in my report based upon that meeting and also based upon a couple other things. Keep in mind, as you stated, this is a conditional use. The preliminary site plan basically gives you conceptual information to see what the conditional use is going to be about. It is not specific, itemized, detailed information, but it's concept information. And that's the difference between the preliminary site plan and the final. The final has all the details, has all the governmental permits that are necessary, has all the stuff that would have to be brought forth to actually begin the process. But the preliminary is conceptual. I got some items to talk about in regards to that. And let me go over those. I've reviewed the sections of the ordinance that deal with the preliminary site plan and the conditional use, and as the chair has made reference to, those items will be reviewed and can be contained in a motion that will justify whatever action you did take. A conditional use can be voted on by itself. It does not have to be voted on with the preliminary site plan. Each one of them can be voted on separately, or they can be voted on together. There's options in doing that. So you can vote to approve, deny, approve with conditions, all of that sort of thing is before you this evening in your assessment. So I reviewed the technical requirements, and basically, in my opinion, at least from a planning standpoint, I didn't review the engineer's report or anything like that. From conceptual, preliminary site plan, and conditional use, they seem to meet those criteria as specified in the ordinance. A few things on the site plan that I will bring to your attention. And that's over on page 2 of my, I think it's page 3 of my report. I go over and analyze certain things that were in my previous report, the site lighting, the public utilities, and I state, and from a conceptual standpoint, it looks like they work, and I think the engineer says that. The details, the permits from environmental health or any other agency would be part of the final site plan. So it looks like most of those things have been addressed. The site lighting, for example, I will be looking for specific details, a photometric plan as part of the final site plan. That tells the impact of what's being talked about. Not only the signs in the parking lot, we'll be looking at the signs on the building, how the actual identification sign is going to be lit. All of that would be looked at on the final site plan. But one thing that I will make reference to is under 3.07, site and building landscaping. A lot of the discussion that took place at the public hearing by both the public and the commission was how this proposal is going to look on that particular site, how it's going to look from Geddes Road, what's the impact to the adjoining residents, things of that nature. And a lot of the, or some of the ways to, shall we say, buffer or screen a use that comes in is through landscaping. And the existing plan did show some of the things that were talked about in the meeting between staff and the petitioner. The landscaping has been extended along, to a much greater extent along the front of the building. It wraps around the entrance drive. The sign is shown. All of that looks much better. The specific types of vegetation and the sizing would be a final site plan issue. All we have here is a concept that that's going to be pretty much landscaped as it is shown on the preliminary site plan. We did state that we could see, or we'd like to see some more landscaping on the southern part of the site. It's pretty much open there. We could get a better visual view from Dixboro Road, if there was landscaping there. So I was suggesting some scattered trees within that area and around the proposed detention pond. My comment in the report is they have shown some. I think it should be a little more extensive. You know, a few more trees should be shown, perhaps both of the conifer and the deciduous variety, to give a nice break as you're looking into that facility from Dixboro Road. If you look at a profile, what do you see when you drive by? If you have some vegetation, some trees that are kind of close up, it's going to shield some of the view if you're looking up on a profile. So I was requesting some of that. I had also requested some vegetation along the southern parking lot because that drops off. The impact there is when you have cars at night with the headlights coming. If you don't have anything to shield that, it can go quite some distance. So I had requested that that area be vegetated, and that is not shown on the preliminary site plan along that southern parking lot. I also had a question because we're looking at this in 2 phases. The first phase is going to have all the site work for the facility, the grading, the detention basin, all of that type of thing. But the first submittal you saw had landscaping on phase 2. This one, all the landscaping has been taken off of phase 2, and I don't understand that. So that's kind of a question that I need for clarification. Because if one thing is important that I've seen through the discussion, it's how to lessen the visual impact, and taking the landscaping off of the parking lot in phase 2 would not be in accordance, in my opinion, with a softening of the view and showing some screening of the parking lot. So I do have a difficulty with that. As I say, the other things pretty much were shown from the requirements of the preliminary site plan, but I do have these issues from the landscaping standpoint. I put in my report the phasing, and I don't know if there's going to be questions with that, but when you deal with a phasing project, it's kind of important to know what the time limits are on the phasing. What happens if a preliminary site plan is approved? And I put in here that the preliminary site plan, if you don't submit the final site plan, becomes null and void in 180 days. If you go through the process into the final site plan, then there's a couple of timelines there. You get the final site plan, then you have 180 days to get a building permit. If you get the building permit but you don't do anything, you've got 545 days, or that becomes null and void. So I just want to be sure that this is a part of the record, because the phasing, I think, in this is important. The final site plan could get into more detail about how the building's going to look for phase 1 and all that type of thing. But I did want to include that information. So that's pretty much a brief assessment of my report. I would mention that when you go through the special use, the conditional use, you've got a lot of options. You can approve it, deny it, conditions, however you want to do in that. And some of the conditions that you might want to consider that would start now to be looked at more formally in a final site plan or something is how the site's going to actually be graded. All of that needs to be done. It needs to be part of the record. And that's also the landscaping. That should come in right away, first up front, all the landscaping. And also I've mentioned in here, which is common for a final site plan, to look at some kind of bonding on certain aspects of the project. That's in the ordinance. You can talk about that. You can request it. So those are a few items in my report, and if you have questions, I will gladly respond.
Okay. We also had a report from Stantec.
Yes, we did. It was dated February 15th. He reviewed it for a preliminary site plan, and he had the following comments. Do you want me to read those off?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Number 1, bumper blocks were added to the northeast and south parking spaces along the outer edge of the parking lot that we had requested to prevent the potential of vehicles from rolling down the steep grade if they pull too far forward. Number 2, where permits were not submitted with the submittal, a copy of all permits will need to be provided with the final site plan. These may include Washtenaw County Health Department, Soil Erosion Control, Washtenaw County Road Commission, MDEQ, Wetlands, and Washtenaw County Water Resources Commission. And a review and approval by the fire marshal will be required on the final site plan for approval. And the proposed improvements increase the impermeable area on the project site. The preliminary site plan should be submitted to the Washtenaw County Water Resources Commissioner to determine if they have jurisdiction and if a permit is required. And he will review the detention pond calculations during the final site plan process. And he also states that a photometric lighting plan will also be required at the final site plan.
Okay. And conclusion? No issues, right? No engineering issues.
No, not at this, not at the preliminary.
Right, so we're, okay. So those are our official reviews we run. I guess at this point, I would like to give the petitioners an opportunity to point out any highlights in the information they've provided that they think would be appropriate, or give us any updates to the information that might be appropriate given the reports from our experts. But we need to identify who's going to represent the petitioner and run us through a presentation. Yes, sir.
My name is Rick Meter. I'm with Washington Engineering. I'm the landscape architect for the project.
Okay.
So I want to talk about the landscaping issues.
Okay.
Okay?
Now would be a great time to do that.
Okay, great.
If you can come up front.
Thanks.
We've got a mic here. I think we can turn on, it'll make it easier for everyone to hear you.
So I get a visual. All right. Okay, first off, I don't
Public is
disagree.
gonna want to see that.
Yeah,
Public
sure.
is gonna want to
How-
see it.
Maybe you could turn it 90 degrees. So
yeah, I want to see you guys out.
And the audience can see it.
Is that okay? Can y'all see it? Okay. All right. So, what you said was absolutely correct. This is the preliminary plan that we turned in, and it shows landscaping surrounding the phase one parking. And it shows the some additional spread out trees that we felt we understood you to want. There was a miscommunication, misunderstanding on our part as far as what was to be shown around the phase two parking. I want to show you if we can just where our plans are for final, and I'm giving you a copy too. There was never our intent not to have landscaping around the parking. It was just a misunderstanding what to show for the preliminary phase one. So this is what we're thinking for final. So, as you see, we do propose the parking to meet the standards of the township all around the parking. There'd be a mix of shrubs and different types of different heights, some evergreen, some not. Most of them are actually native to Michigan, try to keep in the character of the area. And then we thought that that would be with the larger canopy trees on the south edge, in addition to the parking, right at the edge of the parking, that would be sufficient to soften the view to the building. So we thought that along with this and what we were proposing for final, that would be sufficient landscaping. And we apologize for not getting it right on the submittal of preliminary site plan, but that's our intent to show for final. And we would ask at least that you approve it conditionally, that we show what we intend to do anyway. Do you have any questions?
I guess if anyone has questions, this would be related to the additional information that was supplied. Or is there anything else in the change regarding the changes that have been made or such that you'd like to amplify?
In terms of landscape, no, this
is
is
brought forward.
no. I believe the landscape is what we wanted to show. In terms of the other issues, I don't know if there are any other issues that were holding up the preliminary approval. Is that right, Don?
I'll go through the chair. For
Okay, I'm sorry. Were there other issues you're concerned about?
As I stated, this is a preliminary site plan. By definition of the ordinance is a concept.
Right.
When I was discussing the landscaping, I was discussing it based upon what our meeting was all about. And this does show a handout here, some landscaping along that parking lot. I haven't had a chance to look at it to see what kind of landscaping.
Sure.
You know, when you're looking at landscaping there, I don't know, you know, what the height is, because normally when I look at a parking lot and a roadway or adjoining residential, I know the height of headlights, and I know, you know, how they have to be shielded. Normally, if I'm looking at a roadway, I'm looking at a berm with vegetation on top of the berm that's going to shield the lights. Here we've got the parking lot and it drops off into this area. So the idea of screening it and buffering it with some type of vegetation, in my opinion, from a planning perspective, is pretty imperative. So I don't know exactly what you're...
These are mostly viburnum dentatums, which can get to 7 feet tall. There's also some junipers, Virginia, Eastern red cedars, which can get to 20 feet tall. These are taller shrubs along the south edge there, in order to do the screening that you're hoping to do.
Yeah, I'd have to look at it.
Sure. But in terms of...
The idea is to really show some nice screening and buffering there. As far as some of the trees that go off into that field, I'm looking at the perspective as you drive down Dixboro Road, as well as some of the residents there. And in my report, I said, you know, if you could fill that in a little bit more with both conifer and deciduous, it would probably give a much better profile as you're looking. You would soften the view as opposed to an open field and then, you know, a building that goes up, 30, 40 feet, something of that nature. So from a planning perspective, I think that you're going to need to show some additional landscaping in that open area for those two reasons, the roadway and for the adjoining residents. Bringing back the phase 2 landscaping that will be put in as part of phase 1, that's what our understanding is, is good. You should show that on the plan.
Well, we didn't really intend to put in this landscaping as part of phase 1 because 2 reasons. One, there's nothing to screen at that point, and there's 2 is it would be harmed in the process of building the parking lots. We're envisioning completely surrounding the parking that would be used, but nothing else at this point because there really isn't. You would be screening lawn. There's not going to be any building behind the proposed phase 1 building, so there wouldn't be any, in my mind, any need to screen that because there's not going to see anything.
Well, if you're going to grade the whole site, it's going to be ready for the parking lot at
It's
some
going to be,
point.
well,
You've
okay.
scaled it out, you've got the dimensions, you've got the grading all set, etc. Part of putting it into the phase 1 would be 2 reasons. One is that you would be providing some screening in a very open area, and secondly is if you're putting in trees, if you're putting in a deciduous at 2.5 calipers, it's going to have time to grow and mature and really provide some additional buffering. If you're putting in a conifer, like the requirement is, let's say, 6-foot conifer, in a couple of years, that's also going to be up to the point that it's going to provide more screening. So I would suggest for the commission that what we're talking about here, as far as the grading and any part of the landscaping concept, should be looked at the early stages of the proposal.
Okay. Well, I agree that the landscape would be done. It just seemed to me that there's a good chance, especially having the landscaping near the edge of the pavement, that it could be damaged in the process of building the pavement. Yes, it's going to be graded, but you're still going to be having heavy machinery in there moving in and paving it. And we'd be concerned about the damage to those shrubs. So obviously we want to have, but to put them in at this point seems like it wouldn't be quite necessary as long as we had it as a condition that it would be with phase 2 that they would be put in as planned.
Yeah, my recommendation to the planning commission is that if you do the site work, provide proper screening, the plus will be there in phase 1 as well as future phases for the reasons that I mentioned. If you're dealing with phase 1, again, part of the final site plan, we're going to be looking at visual profiles of the building, the things of that nature. And if we're going to be talking about a period of time of maybe, I don't know, a couple of years, shall we say, to phase 2 comes in, my thought for planning commission consideration is to show some kind of buffering on the eastern and that northern side of the building, and putting it in for the parking lot or in areas that are depicted here within the parking lot would be advantageous.
Okay, we agree, Don.
Okay. Thanks.
And as I say, scattering some more trees out front here would really soften the view for the adjoining properties and views from Dixboro Road. I'm not looking at creating a forest, but I'm looking at scattering. When you have, if you looked at this from any kind of profile, you've got 4 trees basically going up to the building, and looks like those are deciduous with a 2.5 caliber. Those are nice, trees, but they're not nice as far as the degree of screening or buffering that would be needed. To put a few more in there, I think would be much nicer to accomplish the visual profile of this area.
If I may, I just want to illustrate one thing for the petitioner here. And that is, if you come here and look at cross-section AA, right? I mean, I'm looking here, and I have almost 40-foot building and another 15 feet for domes on top. I have the land here. I have a couple little clumps depicted there, but right now, what I'm looking at is essentially the view from the southern property line. And if I were to look from the northern property line, and I looked in, there would be woods and other things, and the woods and stuff would be screening maybe 3/4 of this building and such. And right now, I think what we have is we have a view here that doesn't help us understand what type of screening coverage this landscaping proposal would provide.
That's only 50 of those.
But that's a aerial view that doesn't help me understand what the impact on the surrounding property to the south, this residential would be. And I think, I would also say that that's a similar concern that people from the north have expressed, even though there's power lines and wood in between. And I don't believe we've heard a complaint from the large parcel to the east, but if you anticipate future development there, which could very well be residential like it is immediately north or it is to the south, you have to sit down and say, what's this really going to look like? Is it just going to be this monolith with a couple domes projecting out of the ground, and it's basically 53 feet. I think when you count the top of the dome, the building 38, but another 15 feet, I think, for the domes if they're just scales. And I'm just pointing out, for everyone's.
Is that something we could add for the illustration, how they showed the trees were looking? Because this is cross-section, which is right through the building. So maybe we could show an elevation from, say, from here, with the trees that we would add, and kind of help you see how it's softened. I mean, I understand what you're saying.
I'm just saying from my own perspective.
That's what I'm saying, with that company.
So understand the impact of this project on the surrounding areas, which is one of the items listed in the condition that need to be given consideration. Okay. I would be helped immensely, I don't know what the other conditions, but I would be helped immensely if I had, in essence, an elevation that was off at a distance to help me understand how the size and scope of both the project and the landscaping fits into the area.
I can understand, that's certainly something we can provide to you, and do that, adding trees, to show you exactly how it would look. And you can add a few more trees in the That's certainly, we certainly can do that. That's in the plan. It's just as it's shown there. Like I said, the cross section is right in the middle, so it's not going to show that, but we could provide that.
Okay, that was the first point I wanted to make when I was looking at this and kind of relating to the different discussion here, but I don't want to dominate this, so what I'd like to do is allow the other members of the Planning Commission to ask questions at this point in time. And so, who wants to be first? Sandy?
I'm assuming you've been out to the site, is that correct?
I have not.
You have not?
been able to.
Okay, well, I went out to the site, I looked at it from Dixboro Road in, and I also went back into the subdivision behind there. And I think that, to me, that's a great impact that people are going to be dealing with this. I tried to visualize it, and again, thinking of something that big. So I think that Mr. Pennington is exactly right. You have got to do something to help those people in that subdivision back there to buffer it. And if I understand from what I was reading, there was a suggestion that it may be 10 years between phase 1 and phase 2 because you're going to be going as your growth takes place. Is that correct? Is that an excellent, I mean, an accurate projection of what you made, or have you accelerated that?
We're growing maximum of 10% a year.
Right, which is what it said in there. So based on that, I thought it would probably be approximately 10 years until you got to phase 2. So any landscaping that's put in today is going to have 10 years of growth before you add on to that building. So I think that's a very significant thing for you to seriously consider adding that landscaping for those, well,
And that's
from
what
the
she
front
said.
end.
The landscaping is not negotiated. Whatever Don is gonna agree to, we're gonna put.
Okay. And 2.5 caliber trees are probably standard, but I think they're pretty small for the size building that's going in here. So I'd like to see some, a little bit, yeah.
Yeah, I mentioned 2.5, but that's the standard in your.
Right, that's what I was saying, it's probably pretty standard, but
Anything
I'd like
larger
to
than
see.
that?
Yeah, actually, because this is going, when I look at the plans, I think Commissioner Shepherd is exactly right. We're probably talking about 55 feet by the time we take those domes. So landscaping is going to be needed to soften the effect of this building coming into this wide open space. So I have other things concerning the building, but I'm assuming our landscape architect is not.
We can talk about any
Oh,
part of
can
this right now.
we talk about other parts of the building?
Whatever's on that plan.
I'd like to be primarily focused on the conditional use application, okay? Because we will take up the discussion of the preliminary site review following a conclusion on conditional use, depending on the conclusion of the conditional use, okay? So if you focus on the one, and then if we get to the next, then we'll have an opportunity to go back into preliminary site plan type specific
Okay.
things.
Okay. So we can, well, so what you're saying, you want us to go through and deal with the landscaping now, and then you want to revisit. Am I correct in what you just said?
Mhm.
Okay, all right.
So do you need anything else now?
Not right now.
Mr. Chair? Who would like to go next? Mr. Lewandowski?
To follow up on what Mr. Petrowski had talked about, I spent a considerable time on the hill down there in Dixboro Road, especially on the south end where the house is. And now that you removed the landscaping from the south end, that house is clear shot because there's nothing in between the house and the building that'll be. And of course, then there's 2 parcels that were vacant, but I understand, I think one of them was sold, which puts something closer now with nothing for approximately 10 years for them people to stare at. And that landscaping to me, as Mr. Pennington said, and others, is important, and especially to the scale set for the building, you know, and that as far as the building goes, I'm kind of confused in here, the center section of the building, where,
The one that you were showing us?
yes, well, it says phase 1. Now, all that's been removed to the south of that, this landscaping. Am I correct?
Basically, it was, okay. First off, Sonia has agreed that we'll go ahead and do the landscaping it was always intended to do when we built the second property. But now she's agreed to go ahead and do it now.
Okay.
So that, what you're looking at now with these plans will be put in with the construction.
And then, too, with that house, and I went along, and of course, the people across the street, I mean, I'm sitting there looking in one driveway directly at the property there, and I'm thinking, okay, now this is gonna be there. They're looking right down that driveway,
Right.
and I says, okay, got a lot of cars gonna be put in front. It looks like 26 plus on the other side. I didn't finish counting how many are total there. But that, to me, is a lot for such a narrow, it's not really, unless I'm not reading it right, where from the front of the building where the end of the parking out to the road runs. But I don't know if I'd be happy across the street staring at so many cars. I know during service hour you're going to have it, it's going to be eventually filled in there. But that goes with any church. You know, if you got the parishioners, they're going to be there. But that's my concern, is the front to be covered enough or eliminate some of the spots so there's not the number of cars there. I don't know if the spaces can be moved to other parts of the location or whatever. But then I went down into Dixboro Farms, the subdivision to the north, and I did look at the south road that goes in there. There's about 3 houses that stare to this. If you're sitting on the front porch, well, that's the direction they're looking at. And I thought, well, right now you can see through there because there's no foliage or anything of that nature. I don't know how much of that is dead stuff in there. And that won't be there this coming spring and summer. So that the added stuff would help. And that because even though there's the wooded area that's in between, and then of course then the transmission lines that run through there, but then you got the houses that are directly on Dixboro too. I spent a couple hours sitting down there looking and trying to visualize, and I kept thinking in my head, why don't I see a conceptual drawing of this thing so I could get a clear view of what it's going to look like. As far as the church itself, I don't have a problem with that at all. It's just that I want to make sure the landscaping and with the lighting and everything coincides with the neighbors around, so they're not being infringed on in that. That's it for me.
Who else would like to speak? Or I can fill in. You ready to go, Ms. Kelly?
From what I understand, obviously the main concern here is landscaping. And I apologize, I missed the last meeting. Ma'am, I'm assuming you're the one to speak with. I don't know your name, I'm sorry.
My name is Sonia Bichet.
Sonia, okay.
I'm
thank
a
you.
member of the church.
With the concerns that have been brought forth regarding landscaping, what I heard you say is that you're willing to comply with whatever concerns there are regarding that. How long do you think it would take for your planner to submit something to Mr. Pennington reflecting?
Well, if you approve today the preliminary plan review, you're gonna put contingent upon the landscaping, abiding by the landscaping. So when we do the final plan review, everything will be included. So usually the preliminary plan review shows just schematics, and then with the final plan review, you're gonna get all the design, and you can stop it at that time if it does not meet. And I think we heard you very well today, and that's what we're gonna do. The landscaping is very minor to the project, and we would like to do what the community would like to.
Okay. Ms. McLaughlin? Okay.
The landscaping inside the building.
Yeah. If I might, to try and help everyone here, particularly up at the table, and you guys help me see if I can get this right, okay? We seem to be focusing a bit on the size of this building in the environment, and we're talking about the amount of screening that you provide to soften the view. And part of what we need to remember when we go through something like this is that in an agricultural residential district, you can build private residence that would be how tall?
40 feet.
30 feet?
40.
40. Okay, and how close to the side property could that be?
Side property line, I think,
30 feet?
50,
I think it's 50 feet in the AR district.
Pardon?
I think it's 50 feet. Side yard setback, I think is 50.
Yeah, it's 50 feet front, 30 side, and 50 rear.
Okay, so,
It's 30 on each side of the, and
you know,
50
to
on
try and illustrate to people, one of the things we need to think about is, let's say you're 6 feet tall, and you're looking at something off on the horizon that's 1,000 feet tall, but it happens to be 10 miles away. You don't even see it, okay? So the principle here is you have to say, okay, a private residence could be built of substantial size on a lot like this, and it could cover a large portion of the lot, going east-west or north-south, and it could be 30 feet tall. And it could be within 40 feet, and it could be within 50 feet of the side yards, okay? Here, and I don't know the exact numbers, right?
I
but
have the
maybe
exact
you
number, I can help you with it.
Yeah.
The front of the church from the street of Dixie-Boro is 26 foot 6 inches. So when you look at our front of our church, it's nothing more than 2-story house.
Okay, yeah, that's what you see from the western side, and then in addition to that, it's set back
Correct.
about 180 feet, I think, right?
On the north, it looks like that.
On the west side.
Yeah, not on the west side, it's not, it's,
If I were going from the center line of the road,
right,
as an example.
okay, then it's
You have
50,
60 feet,
it's like about 100,
and then 50 feet,
110?
and then, I'm just guessing.
Yeah, it's about 100
80,
from the center.
40 for one of these, so I get 160, 170 feet. So it's a healthy setback, far more than the minimum. It would be my finding of fact going to this out. And then when I look at the setback to the south, I'm going to estimate that at 400 feet, which is a long ways. And when I look at the setback to the north, I'm estimating that at a little over 200 feet. Okay, so while it's easy, and I'm trying to point out the concept of size is kind of a relative thing depending on your proximity to it. And in this case, it appears to me as though we have a landowner or a proposal in front of us that while it has a fairly large building, it is set well within the boundaries of the property such that the view is always from a distance if you're not the property owner. And I'm certainly considering that as I review this conditional use application. Yes, Mr.
It also should be pointed out that in an agricultural district, which this is, you can have a barn that is 75 feet in height, as it permits the right.
Yes.
Just throwing that out there.
Okay. I had another question here, and it's one of procedure, and I guess I'm just, maybe I've lost my focus for Mr. Pennington, but when we talked about the discussions related to the landscaping as depicted on the site plan, does that have to be fixed in order to provide a conditional use permit? Or is that the kind of thing that can be worked out, final details of such if you have a conceptual agreement during a preliminary site plan review? And that, you know, I don't know if we have to have everything exactly right. To be technically right, I understand we might have to get a ways in order to have confidence here at the table that this works properly.
There's a couple answers to your question. The detail of a landscaping plan is normally shown on a final site plan. Species, sizes, specific location, that's normally part of a final. The applicant has, shown a little bit more than what is required on this preliminary site plan. My assessment is, if they're gonna show it on the preliminary, in my report, I said they should address these additional areas. That can be done on the final site plan, that is correct.
Okay, thank you.
I also, if I could mention one other, if that was your persuasion, I would suggest to you in any motion that might be forthcoming that you've received a verbal commitment from the applicant that landscaping as discussed this evening would be shown on the final site plan.
Or the preliminary,
Or the preliminary.
and a revision perhaps.
That's correct.
Any other questions or concerns here related to the conditional use permit? If not, I would entertain a motion, because if we don't believe we need any more discovery or further clarification, we should attempt to resolve this question in front of us.
I have one question.
It's one of the five of us that has to make a
Are you
motion.
gonna entertain any comments from the public?
Anything from the audience before we do any of this?
I'm sorry?
Are we gonna entertain anything from the audience before we do this?
We had public comment at the beginning,
I mean, regarding this,
and we,
normally in public comment, first one, you don't make a comment on this stuff, do you?
they certainly can. It's
Oh.
run a little different than the township meeting.
Oh, okay.
And we've already had our public hearing, so I believe we really more than fulfilled the requirements
Oh,
there.
the only reason I, since I wasn't here in December,
I'm sorry,
November,
okay.
December for this.
No, so I think we're good.
Okay.
And unless the applicant has anything else to add at this time, I think we need to call the question. Yes, sir.
I was not here at the public hearing, but this level of detail was not discussed at the public hearing. It was simply a concept. I might suggest to the chair that this meeting is the first meeting where the public has been informed on even the concept, much less a visual impression of what this structure might look like. So in fact, if I could address the
I hear your
chair,
comment, but
I would like to address the
no,
commission.
we're not gonna have a debate,
Oh,
okay, because it's not public comment time, but I do need to point out that the detailed plans were available in December when we did this. They have been
they have
available.
not been on December.
We're not having a debate here, just please listen to me. The detailed plans were available in December. There was a presentation on the concept. It was much like this, not much different. We had a public hearing. This has been on the agenda. The meeting's been scheduled. People have been able to come in any day that the township's open and go over any of this material, which is the way we handle all this business. So I personally don't agree with your suggestion that this is the first time this is brought forward, because we've been dealing with it for over 60 days.
I've been following your website for over 60 days, and it's not been posted.
And we haven't
That's
seen
not
what it
a-
looks like.
That's not
Nobody
a
knows what it
condition
looks
for
like.
having the information available. That is not the way the planning commission has operated in this township. And I'm not gonna accept your
Was that-
insinuation
from
that that's a
December?
condition on how we need to operate going forward. Okay, so anyways, we're not in public comment. And yet you've been allowed to speak out of our generosity, and I think we're done with that.
You're gonna shut us down?
The question here amongst the planning commissioners is to call a question. And we need to get to that. And so I'll entertain a motion, and if we don't have someone make a motion in about 30 seconds, I will make a motion myself.
I will make a motion, and I move that we approve the application contingent that the applicant stick with her verbal agreement to provide the appropriate landscaping in the final site.
Do we have a
Microphone,
second?
I can't hear you. Can't hear you.
Oh, I apologize.
Maybe you can,
Thank you.
so we have a motion to approve the conditional use application. Do we have a second? I'll second. Do we have any other discussion? Now, do we have the wording of the motion correct, would be my question here.
Planning Commission recommends approval of site plan 12004 conditional use to allow a church in the AR zoning district at, on Dixboro and Joy Road, and I'll insert the tax ID number, contingent on the applicant's verbal commitment for meeting all landscaping requirements.
At the site, the final site plan.
Oh, this is approval, this says go to, recommend approval.
No, it's not, no record. This is approval.
Oh, okay.
Yes, Mr. Pennington?
With your permission, when you opened the session, you made reference to the conditional use article of the zoning ordinance.
Yes.
I think it would be appropriate if you put in the motion that you have reviewed that, or at least make reference to section 63.07.
Okay.
Okay, that'll be part of the motion
What
also.
if we were to add a reference to the conditional use standards of section 63.07? So that we say, with due consideration given to the standards of section 63.07 of the Township zoning ordinance,
Site plan 12004, conditional use, St. Mary's Coptic Orthodox Church on Dixboro Road, contingent upon meeting the landscaping, the additional landscaping requirements.
Yeah.
Verbal commitment for appropriate.
and you good with that?
Yes.
So we've revised the motion, so now we need to, I move that we revise the motion as was just read. Is there a second to that?
Second.
Okay, and now it's just a voice vote when you revise.
Kelly, Casey was the one who initially made it. You were the second.
Sure, we can do it that way, and then the next question is, do we have a voice vote on the revision, or we just have a vote?
You can just vote on the
So,
motion.
okay, so we believe we have the motion we want, and so now I'd like to call for a roll call vote.
You want, but we don't.
Ms. Kelly?
Yes.
Mr. Shepherd?
Yes.
Mr. Lewandowski?
Yes.
Ms. McLaughlin?
Yes.
Ms. Petrowski? Yes.
Motion passes by unanimous roll call vote.
May I ask a question? The only picture we ever saw of this church is that. And you have a picture that is much more intrusive. And he has one too, but they don't show that. So when we made our comments the last time, we had no idea that they were coming into a community and building something that has doesn't look like anything else in the area, and is so intrusive that I worry about these two people who just bought the land that's going to be next to this church. We never saw a picture of what this church would look like, and I can't understand why you don't
Unharmonious.
take public comments
We have no.
when
Okay,
the
but-
picture has
all
never
right.
been shown.
Again, we were giving consideration, but recognize that this is not the point in the meeting for public comment, okay? we have more business to conduct, and we have public comment coming up at the end of the meeting. And we're gonna run this in an orderly way, because it's the planning commission's meeting, serving the interests of the township, but it is not the audience's meeting. Thank you. Now, item 8B is a preliminary site plan review for St. Mary's Coptic Church. And what I would like right now is, we have the information in front of us, but I would really like to start this off with just a quick refresher on the site plan, preliminary site plan review conditions, and the items you pointed out, Mr. Pennington, related to the preliminary site plan review, so that we're focused on that, if you would.
Okay, as I mentioned, the conditional use, special use is based upon consideration of preliminary site plan, because that gives a concept what the project is going to be about. So in review of that, would be 64.03B, which would be information required, would be the information to look at and make sure that is included on the preliminary site plan. Also, C of that same section would be standards for review, which is very similar to the conditional use section that you reviewed a moment ago. This would be standards for review regarding the preliminary site plan. So those two areas would be what you would need to focus on.
Okay. Article 64. All right, so I need a moment myself to get to Article 64 and refresh my memory on the conditions. You've been through all the requirements of 64.03.
I think both the engineer and myself, we went over in our previous reports, we went over in this report, and we had the opportunity to meet with the applicant prior to this meeting to review those items.
Okay. So, I don't know if you all have that, but there's what, 11 standards for review that are called out. I'll just reiterate them quickly here, if you don't have the ordinance in front of you. The first one is that we have all the required information. The second one is that the development conforms to the regulations of the zoning ordinance for its district. The third is that the applicant may legally apply. The fourth is that traffic within the site in relation to streets and sidewalks shall be safe. That the fifth is that the proposed site plan will be harmonious with and not harmful, injurious, or objectionable to existing and future uses. That the sixth is that the natural resources will be preserved to the maximum feasible extent, and the development will comply with erosion and sedimentation regulations. Seventh, that the development is adequately coordinated with improvements serving the subject property. Eighth is the proposed development request respects natural topography to a maximum feasible extent. 9 is that organic, wet, or other soils which are not suitable for development will be undisturbed or will be modified in an acceptable manner. 10, that the proposed development act properly respects floodways and floodplains. And 11 is that phases of development are in logical sequence so that any phase will not depend on a subsequent phase for adequate access, utility service, drainage, and for erosion control. And those are the standards, right? I mean, there's nothing else that applies at this point.
That's correct.
Okay. And so then if I go back to your report, where you talk about the preliminary site plan, this is conclusion 401, right? And, well, actually, I guess I have to look at revised section 3, right?
Yeah,
And I look at the notes, and when I look at your comments, there's no issue in 3.01 with the building characteristics or the project phasing, which is 02. The site lighting says that that's a final site plan item.
They do show the actual poles within the parking lot.
Mhm.
The height of the poles, the type of light, the lumens, the photometrics. to be-
Right, so that's what's handled on the final site plan with regard to whether, and that's where you handle the concerns of light spilling off the property and such, right, which is always made easier if you do effective landscaping and buffering.
It helps.
Right, okay, so that's site lighting. The utilities is an issue for the county,
Get them on our side.
right, and not required as for this final site plan, the permits from the county. The parking is shown in phases, and there's no issue there. The signage is the characteristics and such, and the intensity of lighting and all of that are final site plan issues, not preliminary site plan issues. And then we went through the landscaping, and we've had our discussion related to landscaping and how it needs to be final site plan, but we have concerns that the applicant has said they will address. So can I conclude from that now that we've handled the conditional usage question, that your recommendation is that this preliminary site plan is acceptable?
It's all going backwards to me.
Thank you. All right. Are there any questions here from the planning commission members? Mr. Lewandowski?
This guy's powers above his head.
No, I'm just more confused now. No.
Ms. Kelly? Mr. McLaughlin?
I just had questions about the building.
Absolutely.
He better be afraid.
I mean, is there anything that gives you an idea of exactly what phase 1 is gonna look like, or am I just having a hard time? It would be nice to see what it looks like, since it could remain that way for who knows how long. And that will be the impact on the environment for a while. And we wouldn't want people to have to look at a partially done building.
This is the front elevation, this is what everybody from the Explorer will see.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's pretty much.
Okay, but that's shown without the landscaping
Right.
in place, right?
Right.
So it doesn't put the actual site as viewed from the roadway in perspective.
Correct.
Yes, Mr. Pennington?
When we had our staff meeting, the applicant was going to supply what you're referencing, is kind of like a bird's eye view looking down. That is to be supplied by the applicant. Again, normally that's something of a final site plan, where you get the actual physical, the profiles, the details, the building materials, and things of that nature. The architect didn't know if he could have it ready for this meeting or not. But they will be providing a bird's eye view as to the building, the way it looks at Dixboro Road, the parking, and all of the stuff that would be peripheral to that building and parking area.
In phase 1. So that we,
Both.
You have an elevation showing phase 1 that it's gonna be a finished product. The building will look like a house that is finished from all 4 sides.
okay.
There will be no unfinished areas, or, I mean, it will be a usable building, it will meet all the codes requirement, will get the occupancy for it. The back elevation will be finished as if it's a finished product, all the sides, all the front, it will be a finished building.
That is
In and
shown
out.
on the submittal. That is shown as she depicts it.
I saw the back of,
Right.
the one that showed the back of phase 1.
Excuse me, can I add to that, please? If you look at the north elevation or the south elevation, it's clearly identifying where phase 1 start and where phase 2 start. So there's a dividing point there at the end of the basically like a tower structure. That's for the north and south.
Yeah, so this is, that's the view from the north property line, right, from the north side of the building, right, and the highway would be out here. That's the view from the south side where the highway is out. Pretty close. And then the walking back elevation right here.
Otherwise, take it.
That's phase 2. This shows
This
that
one's
this is
one.
what's envisioned for phase 1.
That's phase 2.
Well,
No, no.
I don't either. I look at it online.
Do you have some questions?
I have a couple quick questions. I understand that where the back is between phase 1 and phase 2 is going to be sided as opposed to, which would be different compared to the other sides of the building, correct? Is that correct?
It will be partially sided.
I'm sorry?
We're gonna use siding only as a partial part of that back elevation.
At the back, where phase 2 will eventually come out of it, is that correct?
Yes, the whole building will be architectural concrete block, the material, and it's gonna rack at the end of the towers. And only in the area where you're gonna have that phase 2 extension, temporary, we'll put siding for now.
Okay.
That's all.
10 years is a pretty long temporary, though.
Well,
I'm assuming you're going to use a good quality siding, because siding can be
Absolutely.
many
For
different grades.
the best benefit of the building as well.
Well,
We
also,
have to use
for the
something
benefit,
with
for the
good quality.
benefit of the people that are looking at that, because that is a large, you
To
know.
tell you the truth, I'm really having a hard time. Who's gonna look at the back? You have.
I'm right next door. I
Okay,
do look at it every day.
can I step in for a second?
I can see it from my house.
That's the site plan here. We have 12.68.
Face south.
The whole building, phase 1 and phase 2, cover only 2% of the lot size. The zoning allow us to go to 10%, but we choose to go with a smaller building comparing to the site. Now, if you look at that site, first of all, from the Dixie-Boro site here, the road is higher than the building, than the first level of the building, approximately about 9 feet, which take away from that elevation height we all worried about. Second, in the north side here, in the east side, you have a very heavy trees going all the way there. Unless somebody intentionally wanna come and wanna step at the borderline there and start looking, they will hardly see anything beside what you see from a huge distance. So I am not really sure what is the concern. The elevation we're talking about with the siding is here, at that line. So unless somebody, again,
It's
come
that very
in the
small
back,
portion, correct? It's that
I'm
very
sorry.
small portion where
This here.
phase 2 comes out,
yeah,
correct?
below my finger is phase 1, above my finger is phase 2. So that's the elevation we're talking about. So unless you come towards the back and look directly at it, chances are you really don't see much.
You're gonna see it from the road, though.
How are you going to see it from the road?
If it's up 75 feet, you'll see it from the road.
Wait till you come up
Come
to
on, let's have
75
order
feet,
here.
sir.
It's on the east side of the building.
If you recognize, you can speak. But this is not gonna be chaos, okay? No, I'll be considerate and allow a couple questions here, okay? And we'll go with the woman who's raised her hand and asked to be
I will
recognized.
need her name.
Maureen Murphy, could we see the drawing that is at that table? Can somebody put it up so that we can see it? Because What concerns me, and I'm not going to see this church from my house, what concerns me is that they have come into a residential area and are building something that has no resemblance to anything else in the area. And it doesn't look like a house. And I don't understand why they want to do this. There are 2 churches already on Dixboro Road, and those churches have built so that it looks like the area. And you don't notice them, and they're not intrusive. This young couple just bought the land next to that church. And you said something about it shouldn't destroy property values. It does. This is going to lower the property values of people who live on either side of this church. It doesn't look like anything else in the area. And I don't understand why they want to build something that does not conform with the rest of the area.
Okay.
And could we see that
I'll
picture,
just point out
because
that
it
that was a
shows what
concern.
it actually looks like.
That was also expressed in the public hearing that was held in December.
No, it wasn't. I was here.
It is not a new concern.
It's not true.
It may be a new voice to it, but if you were to check the public record, you would find that is one of the types of comments that were received in December when we held the public hearing. Okay, yes, sir.
But Todd Stewart, 5555 East Joy Road. Doug, the one thing is, you know, when we opened up the meeting, it was for public comment. But we didn't have anything to comment on. The last time they came, they showed us a little rendering, a little green over here in the corner. We had no idea what it was going to look like. Me being a neophyte at this, I didn't even know you could go to the township and look at blueprints. Now those blueprints became available last week, and you have to go through Donna to get the blueprints. Donna was on vacation last week. So they've had maybe 3 days for the township to even look at prints and see what they were talking about. So again, I agree with this gentleman here, that, you know, we're kind of in the dark. You know, we weren't prepared to come, and we thought you would be telling us. And now we're learning, and we're told we can't say much. So it's kind of, you know, kind of a predicament. Let's face it, this is going to be, let's say it was a manufacturing building going in on Dixboro. And it was 6,000 square feet of manufacturing. And here's the 4 walls, and we got our name up on the top, and we're going to see 250 people, and they're going to come and go. Now, for the church people to say that this is going to be only open on Sundays, well, looking at the website of all the churches throughout the United States, they are busy Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, whatever. And as it grows, they will continue being busy. Okay, fine. There's not one thing that I think Salem Township can do as far as saying you can't have a church. The state of Michigan says you can't do that, all right? So we can sit here and play all the games we want to. All we're saying is let's do it correctly. And God bless you people up there. You're trying to listen and understand and at least hear our voice, because we want it done correctly. The church in Troy is enormous. It is way back off of Livernois. You'd never know it was there. And when they have a wedding or whatever, they have to hire their own police to get them out of the church because they've got so many people. So there's a lot of things that we have to think about when we're discussing this. And phase 1 is fine, but how many square feet in phase 1? We don't know. I don't know. How many in phase 2? I know the finished product looks like it may be 6,000. That's a pretty good sized church. So I think you're approved for 300, right? 300 seats you're approved to put in as far as your septic's concerned?
250
Okay.
seats.
How many?
260 exactly.
I hear what you're saying.
Yeah, thank you.
And I'll just make a further comment in the interest of common understanding here, okay? Because again, we're not in a public comment arena at this point in the meeting, but I have to tell you that through the township's processes, okay, we have this zoning ordinance. And I mean, this whole book is the township zoning ordinance. And we are bound by this ordinance to follow it. And this ordinance outlines the types of uses that can happen in districts, what the procedures are for some of the uses, others. Other uses become, in essence, a development right in the district, okay? And we have to follow and respect that. And we're, with the help of our professionals and our wits about us and our understanding of what's going on here, we're doing the very best we can to respect that process and not go down the wrong path. And one of the aspects of that activity is for the public to be involved. They need to be aware of what's in the zoning ordinance, and they need to understand the procedures by which the planning commission and the township board operates, and also the way the township offices run and such. And we have not changed the information processes here. We've been following exactly the precedent that's been set through who knows how long, but certainly for 6 years or more than that, because I've only been paying attention for maybe the last half dozen. And we're following the methods that the township has been using successfully. And I find it's unfortunate that when we get engaged with a new group of the public, because we happen to have a business item that affects their part of the township, and so now we have their interests. It's unfortunate that there's this learning curve that gets us to, where we wish there was more involvement earlier. And you wish that, many of you wish that, and I wish it too, okay? But where we are right now is we're giving consideration to all this, we hear the voices, and we're trying to reach the conclusion that we can reach with the application that we have in front of us, that the petitioner has a right to present and expect to be resolved in a timely manner. And so I will just tell you, we're doing the best we can, and we hear everything you're saying, even though you may not get the perception that we're listening by our actions. I can guarantee you we're listening very carefully. And I appreciate your concerns. Personally, I can't speak for the other commissioners here. Okay? Now, where were we in the point of the meeting? We were trying to understand if we had any other questions from the planning commission. Ms. Petrosky.
Mr. Pennington, because of the delay between phase 1 and phase 2, based on the approval of this, do they get to, do they have to periodically come back to us and say that phase 2 is still in progress, so to speak, or once phase 1 is complete, whenever they get to phase 2, they then produce phase 2 and nothing comes before?
That's why I mentioned in my report.
The 2 years at the very end, every 2 years they have to.
Okay, the preliminary site plan is good for 180 days.
Right.
They have to start the final site plan within a specified period of time. If they don't, then they can come back to you, the planning commission, and request an extension.
So they do have to come back
If they
periodically
exceed
to
that timeline, that is.
extend phase 2, is what they're saying.
They can come
Okay.
back and request an extension.
Okay. Looking up and down the table, and we look like we're ready. Someone needs to be courageous here and propose a motion. And we know what our choices are. Well, all right. I'd like to make a motion that we approve the preliminary site plan as presented with the, given consideration, no, stop, okay, as presented, with the provision, or based on the condition, that the applicant provides within a time period, let's call it, elevations or illustrations of the north, south, east, and west facades that help us see the that allow us to see the landscaping to scale as viewed from the property line, and meets the conditions set for the increased coverage of the landscaping and other buffering activities that were brought forward earlier in this meeting. It's kind of long-winded, but that's my motion. And then we're looking for a second.
Second.
Mr. Lewandowski seconds. All right, so now I want to, now that I've drafted it verbally, maybe Ms. Cripps, when she gets it organized here, she can read it back to us.
Planning Commission approves site plan 12.04, preliminary site plan review for St. Mary's Coptic Orthodox Church as presented with provision that the applicant provide elevations from the north, south, east, and west, including landscaping to scale from all property lines and any additional landscaping or buffering as required.
Okay.
What he has planted or has grown 5 years?
What would be a reasonable time frame? 14 days?
Well, they have 180 days to submit that for final site plan review, and that would be part of the final site plan review. They have 180 days once they have preliminary approval to bring a final site plan in front of you.
Okay, but in this
So you
case,
want those
I
plans ahead
would
of
like
time?
the information to be made available to the public.
Ahead of time.
So I would really like to set a 30-day deadline on those illustrations. They don't have to be perfect.
Okay.
And then I'm assuming we will make them available, including,
Yeah, they'll be available during the office unless policy changes and we can post them on the website.
is there any other related
Is that doable
discussion?
in 30 days?
Oh,
Yeah, 30 days.
And I would take the pictures from the lot lines, so as you're viewing it from the north, south, east, and west, not up next to the church, from the distance. Yeah. Yeah. The bird's eye
I
view.
do want, I don't know where to add this, but we need to add that, we find that the preliminary site plan meets the standards for review established in Article 64.0, Section
03C.
C. 64.03, Section C.
Okay, I will make sure that that is part of your motion.
Okay. Yes, Mr.
If I
Pennington.
could add, just for your consideration, use the date April 1st.
I'm sorry?
Use the date April 1st for the plans
For
to
the
be
deadline?
submitted, because that's a Monday and it's the first of the month, and we clarified the exact date.
Okay, so we'll change it to April 1st.
Okay.
Are you still good with that, Mr. Lewandowski?
Yes.
Okay. So, site plan review, roll call vote, or voice vote?
Chairman Shepherd?
Yes. We're doing a roll call vote, it's
Yes.
the easiest way.
Yes. Mr. Lewandowski?
Yes.
Casey Kelly?
Yes.
TJ McLaughlin? Yes. Sandy Kowski? Yes.
All right, thank you. Motion passes.
So he must have.
We're now at item 9 on our agenda, which is reports of commissioners and committees. And Ms. Cripps.
The meeting, we will have a meeting here at the Township Hall Tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, for the Parks and Recreation, the Open Preservation Plan. It's a kickoff meeting with the members of the committee. So that will be here at the Township Hall tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, if anyone is interested in joining us.
Very good. Any other reports from commissioners? Okay. We move on to item 10, which is approval of minutes for February 4th, 2013. And everyone should have we should all have a draft copy of those minutes. And I will entertain a motion from the head table.
I make a motion that we approve the minutes of February 14th, 2013 as presented.
February 4th?
Or, I'm sorry, did I say 13th?
February 4th.
4th. I apologize.
As presented.
As presented.
So second? Ms. Kelly. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Motion carries. Reports and announcements.
In front of you, I have placed a copy of the corrections that were made to the industrial district, as Mr. Pennington had, and Mr. Nanny agreed to have in front of you. They have been, Mr. Horton came in and received a copy of them today. So I'd like you to take a look. I'm sure some people took some notes just to make sure that they meet, and at the next time we have a meeting on the zoning ordinance, we can discuss
Okay. For those of you in the audience, we had a lengthy review of section 40 of the new proposed zoning ordinance, where we're rewriting it to bring it into the 21st century and trying not to change anything that we really don't intend to change. And so we went through a large portion of it, and we're making progress at getting the drafts reviewed, and so the draft material has been updated for section 40. Now, will that be on the website?
Not at this point in time. I just as soon have all the corrections go on at one time.
Okay. And
also, I think at that last meeting, Ms. Hamilton had to leave early. She had some questions. We did meet with her at the Township Hall. She discussed her issues, and these gentlemen were going to look at her concerns and see if they can be adjusted.
Okay. So we've tentatively said we will get back into that project and the regular meeting in March.
If there are no other agenda items, or
Which would be March 18th.
that is your, I believe,
As a
your
point of
meeting.
information for the people in the audience.
We also have the meeting next Monday night, March 4th, on the rezoning of Salem Springs property.
The 51 acres, 91 acres.
91 acres, yes.
That was the same parcels that were subject to the referendum.
Referendum, yes.
And then the proposal, the
That will
signage
be
is
the
up.
only thing on the agenda. That is the public hearing. The notices have gone out. The ad has appeared in the paper, and we will proceed from there.
Okay, and we have a report pending from Mr. Manning, which we expect to see no later than Wednesday and have it distributed.
Yes.
Very
So
good.
we'll hopefully have the weekend to look at, but we will have a meeting here. I think it's March 4th at 7:30. And
Okay.
then your regular meeting on the 7th.
Well, we're now ready for item 12, which is public comment. Anybody wish to comment? I'll go right there. Yes, sir.
My name's Tim Haller, Haller. I'm with the Dixboro Farms Property Owners Association. Many of us here, reside in the subdivision just to the north of the proposed construction site. And I wanted to make first a comment that when you schedule public hearings, I think the public would like to attend and make comment, but in an educated format. Meaning tonight, we heard for the first time the descriptions of what the building may look like. In fact, I think Ms. McLaughlin accurately represented several of our concerns when she said she's having a hard time visualizing how this may look in place, even though there may have been a schematic or a site layout presented in December. So my comment would be to consider having the public hearing when there's sufficient information presented to the public so that there's adequate time for the public to study the material and then make comment. I believe in the December public hearing, it was effectively the statement that the applicants want to build a church. Here's the layout. Is there any comment? And there's simply not enough information presented in December to make the public hearing effective. My second question or comment is actually a question, and that is, will the public have the opportunity to comment to the commission upon submission of the final drawings?
It's a public meeting.
Okay. The reason that I think I heard many of my neighbors discuss with you tonight, we don't object to a church. The two churches that are on Dixboro Road look good because they fit in. They're harmonious with the area. And I think, excuse me, the concern is whether or not the subject building will be harmonious. And if we can make it look harmonious, there'll be 100% support. That's our comment. We do not deny the right for the church to exist there. There's two churches already that we support. We would just like to have it fit in. So if the applicants could take that into consideration, especially as it relates to the facade of the building, that would go a long way in winning over the community, I believe. Thank you.
Yes. Yes, sir.
Chris Arcure, A-R-C-U-R-E, 5160, the vacant lot we just purchased to build our home due south of the proposed church. My comment is that I cannot understand how what appears to be several acres of concrete on the ground and a retention pond and a septic system for 300 people and a 6,000 square foot building could not be considered something that would impact the area in a degradatory fashion. It's a residential area, which is why we chose to build our house there. It's away from commercial buildings and lights and noise, and this seems to be something that is completely contrary to why we chose to put our house there in the first place. And I agree wholeheartedly with if the appearance were different or taken into consideration, you might go a long way towards winning over some people. And I was not given any access to, although I tried many times to find out what the building would look like and what the plans were until tonight. We just weren't given that opportunity, and that's really not right. So I would love to see the full details and then have an opportunity to comment on it in an educated fashion.
Okay. Anyone else?
Could we see the plans that are on that table? Not just the facade that we were shown, but the plans that, I understand that, but it gives a pretty good idea of what this is going to look like from the road.
After the meeting, you're certainly welcome to come up and take a look at it.
Okay.
I'll go there.
Tom Upton, I live in Dixboro Farms, and I'm part of the POA also. And, you know, has anybody done any type of impact study on what it's gonna do for our home values? You know, all of us have put a lot of money into our homes, and, you know, we figured that, hey, this is the place that we want to, you know, stay for the duration. And with something like this, you know, it's definitely not, you know, it's not gonna be compatible with what the area is right now. And we just, I think most of us feel very unsure of what the future holds, because this phase one thing is one thing, but then when you get this phase two, you know, what is it gonna look like? You know, what is this, you know, I'm hearing domes, I'm hearing spires.
Yep.
What is this thing gonna be? You know, it's very, you know, it's very unsure for us to know what's going on. And 10 years from now, it's too late. Sounds like it's too late already.
Okay. In the back.
In the back. In phase one, how many square feet are in there, in the first phase?
I'll accept an answer from the petitioner, the applicant.
Approximately 3,000.
Pardon?
Approximately 3,000 on the upper level and then 3,000 on the lower level.
Okay, so the ground coverage is 3,000 square feet?
Are there classrooms in the phase one?
Yes,
There's classrooms?
yes,
Is there a kitchen in phase one?
yes.
None?
Not non-cooking, but
Okay.
just for heating,
Okay, how many bathrooms are in there?
according to the code, to
Well,
fulfill
again,
the
code,
ordinance code.
the code, have you done anything more since your 2007 approval? Have you been back to Washtenaw?
It didn't come on 2007.
Well, yeah, you went in 2007, and you received a conditional in
From the-
2007.
You're saying the
It said
Washington
that
County Health Department?
That's correct.
Are you agreeing on this discussion? Or?
Yeah. Well, I think, I'll make an observation here, and I think that the applicant would be very willing to talk to the people with concerns over the development, and that I would like to facilitate that exchange, but not do it as part of the meeting. I think it would be more efficient if you could have that conversation.
Well, I think this really is, everybody should know this if it's the case, or
I
I
understand.
could be wrong, but, you know,
what
I'd like to bring it up.
Well, I agree. Here's my point. We have this room, you can have this discussion, if I think they're willing to stay, but if we're not, but what I don't wanna do is just drag public comment out.
Okay, and I appreciate that, but are you familiar with this? That the last time they were at the sanitation, or whatever we call it, was in 2007. They said, yes, you can put a building up there. It can be 300 seats. You can have 300 seats there. You cannot have a kitchen, you cannot have a daycare, you cannot have a school, because it will not take it. That ground will not take it. And that's in a letter that they were given in 2007.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Ms.
As
Cruz.
part of your final site plan review, they have to bring in those agency approvals from the health department. So you will have that paperwork. That is part of what final site plan review
So
covers.
Ms. Cripp's point would be that that's a county level review, and that is, in the process we go through, that's yet to come, and she's pointing out that that can in fact create restrictions on the use of the plan other than what we've envisioned here with the site plan review.
And I appreciate that, but in the site plan, if it showed a kitchen, and it showed classrooms, and it showed this, their approval was for 200 seats, and really basically being open on Sunday. It's gonna be, it's gonna be more than
Not a
that.
daycare.
Those are
It's
not,
not a daycare.
no daycare center, those are Sunday school, which any church is part of the church.
And
I
this,
just want, if you allow me for 1 second, I see a lot of concern. As a neighbor to you, genuinely, I want to assure you that we are coming here as good neighbors. That's number one. Number two, the quality of the building will be, the building itself will be comparable for a residential building. Number three, the concern about the domes, those are signature for the Coptic Orthodox Church. Those will be an addition
to the beauty of the nature here around the area. And you can look to the social township where they have the Greek Orthodox Church. They have this, we have the similarities of the domes. We are not coming here to invade your privacy. We are coming here to share with you the nature. And we are very considerate for our neighbor here, the young man. We bought this land 2006. And for you as a new neighbor, you should also have that as a public information for you that your next door neighbor is a church. So this is not a hidden information. For the time plan, we followed to the letter the ordinance rule and regulation according to the ordinance of the township. So we did not exceed anything, and we thank you for allowing us to share that with you.
Anyone else? Fine, we're done with public comment. I declare this meeting of the Planning Commission adjourned at 9:16 p.m. And thank you.